Great. Welcome back. And my name's James Mawson, founder and editor-in-chief of Global Corporate Venture. And I'm delighted to be joined for this next session by Nicolas Sauvage from TDK Ventures. Welcome, Nicolas.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm delighted. I'm really excited by this session because we'll be kind of looking a little bit more detail on how and why CVCs can capitalize on this increased activity that we've seen this year. And you, in many ways, TDK, represent that sort of new breed of CVCs that are coming out, shaking up the market and really adding value, not just to the portfolio companies, but to the parent, and doing it in a really professional, exciting way. So I'm excited to see and learn from some of the insights that you can bring. So, but perhaps before we start, you could give a little bit of context about TDK and TDK Ventures, and just so that from an audience point of view, they know where you're coming from.
Okay, thank you. So TDK Ventures is a corporate venture arm of TDK Corporation. I think most of the audience, maybe half of the audience, I should say, because I think the split is 35 years old, would know about the TDK cassette. Clearly, TDK has moved on, and now we are really developing a lot of products around sensors, actuators, battery, energy solutions, passive components. So a lot of the products that you end up seeing in many of our portfolio companies you see behind me. So we have invested in 18 companies so far in hard tech. And that was from our fund one of $50 million, which we launched in 2019. We completed investing with that fund one with 15 portfolio companies. We still have some reserve, of course, for follow-on investments with these companies. And then we launched in April of 2021 our fund number two, which is 3 times the size, $150 million. And this is all about exploration missions. So looking at where TDK wants to go in these major mega trends in energy transformation and digital transformation, but really investing in startups that are looking at markets we're not in yet today with technology we may not have. And so this is how we started TDK Ventures. That's our why. And we're staying true to our why all along the way.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. And how long has TDK Ventures been going then? Because I think, it's one of the things, you've been around 35 years in terms of people's consciousness around the cassettes, but obviously TDK Ventures is much newer than that. So how long has it taken you to build up these 18 portfolio companies, Nicolas?
Well, actually, I will start with TDK, which is an 86 years old company. And they've been going for so long from B2B to B2C and then B2B. And TDK Ventures is the first CVC they had. And it started, so it was approved by the executive committee and the board of directors of TDK in March and April 2019. We officially launched in July 2019. So we've been going for a little more than 2 years.
Well, build up 18 portfolio companies in 2 years or so. It's pretty impressive. That's almost one a month. It's one every 6 weeks or so, I think. That's pretty fast paced. And I suppose the big question then is, we've seen when you look at the GCV analytics data, and I think we did this in partnership with TDK Ventures, when we looked at those deals, who was doing them, what we found was really interesting was that through COVID, rather than the number of corporate venture units shrinking and the number of new units slowing down, actually we saw the reverse. We saw more corporates continuing to do deals and more new units coming in. And I think it was something like 50-50. Isn't that right when you ran the analysis, Nicolas? Did that surprise you?
Actually, I'm really glad you have all this data that we could research on. And it started with actually an interview with Claudia from INSEAD, where I said it feels like half of the deals have been done by CVCs that have been born during the pandemic. And then thank you, Jim and Kaloyan, for checking. This is actually really about 50-50, which really tells us a lot about corporations and how they acted during the pandemic. And they tried to explore how to learn about the market and the ecosystem and new technologies. And they identified that putting together a corporate VC is a really good tool to have in your innovation tool set. But yes, you're right. So 50-50, it's if you are an entrepreneur and you receive investments from a corporate VC during the pandemic, so we started, I think, looking at from April 1st, 2020, 50% chance you had an investment from a corporate VC that was born during the pandemic. Wow. And that is just very interesting, because it also means that we have all these new corporate VCs that need help, and they need our help as a community. And maybe this is also why we should talk about it today, because so many of these corporate VCs are looking for this lighthouse. How do we make sure we don't crash? How do we make sure we help entrepreneurs? So I think we should double click on that, Jim, if you're okay with that.
Well, we'll definitely think we should dive into it, because I think that also creates a risk. If you're an entrepreneur and you deal with a CVC that maybe hasn't got a lot of experience, things could go wrong, because not all corporate ventures do it as well as TDK Ventures. So I suppose if we take the sort of starting point back, which is, how did you approach starting in corporate venture capital, and why, and how helpful was your own personal journey to join TDK Ventures, your entrepreneur journey? Did that sort of shape or reflect the way you thought about supporting entrepreneurs?
So it's my personal journey, I think, is probably one of the best way to start, because I learned about corporate VC only in 2018, summer 2018, when I was attending a Stanford executive program. And I had a first class with Jesper Sorensen on the why you should do a corporate VC. And it made so much sense. And then I checked and I realized that TDK did not have a corporate VC. And then I became really excited. I was like, okay, I'm going to say we should do one. I'm going to propose it. And then the week after, I had a class from Ilya Stribulov. And he basically spent all the time saying why corporate VCs don't work and why they fail, and all the reasons on the design why they don't perform. And so you can imagine, you get all the excitement and you understand why you should do it. And then you have this cold bucket of why you should not do it. And then I was lucky to have a chance meeting really with Paul Holland, who came to teach at Stanford for an evening class. And I told him about my dilemma. I see all the reasons we should do it, and I see all the reasons why we should not do it. Who is right? And Paul basically said, well, actually, they're both right. And what that means is, you have to make sure that in your design, you capture the why you should do it. In our case, it's an exploration mission, discover new technologies, new marketplaces we believe are small today, but will become massive tomorrow. That's our why. And also make sure that all the things that could be distractive to the entrepreneurs, to the partners, to the corporate VCs, but also the financial VCs that are in the loop, you design your corporate VCs to avoid all these mistakes. And that's why I refer to the lighthouse for a global corporate venturing team, because you're telling us where not to crash. And that's, I think, really important. And I think for our industry, this is even more important, because when I just got started learning about corporate VC, I learned a lot about the reputation of corporate VCs, because I was not only asking corporate VCs, I was also asking financial VCs. And there's a lot of opinions. Some love them and some not so much. And I think knowing why it didn't work in the past is so important to share with all these new corporate VCs. And when you think that half of the CVCs making a deal during the pandemic were born in the pandemic, we really should help them. And this is not just to help them, it's also to help our industry. You just need a few bad actors to make the industry back to the 10 years ago or 20 years ago, where the reputation was not stellar for corporate VCs. And what is nice in our industry is that we have all these corporate VCs that have been going on for 10, 20 years, doing it the right way. And they are perfect people to learn from. And I'm going to say they are so eager to help. So it's really about reaching out to them.
Yeah, I think it's with that altruistic side, people want to pay it forward. They've been through the pain points. And if they could share to avoid other people going through it, why would they not? People like that. And then secondly, there's the self-interest piece, which actually, if the industry is seeing good, it makes it easier to get competitive deals. I think we've heard from Kalyan Antonov, you mentioned him before, runs GCV Analytics, that actually the percentage share of deals being won by CVCs has actually started to fall in the past few years. As more capital comes in from hedge funds or mutual funds or other investors, that actually the mind share of CVC among the entrepreneurs is going down. So there's that dual risk in some ways. You've got, more newer corporates winning more deals, which is great. Yep. There's more money going in. It's a record amount of money, record number of deals involved in corporate ventures. But even so, the overall venture market is so big and expanding so quickly that the opportunity to win deals is even harder. So I suppose, therefore, if you had that sort of light bulb moment, mid 2018, you went to Stanford, great place to go. We should do CVC. You met the right people, Paul Holland, who gave you some good advice. You had the sort of what not to do's. And then a year later, you can convince your boss to start and actually get going. But that's not easy to do. I've known corporates who have spent 10 years with people inside going, you should do this, you should set up a CVC. And they've not done it. Why was TDK so responsive at that time to the idea?
Well, I think the top management of TDK are entrepreneurs in heart. And what I did not know is that when I came to make the proposal, that proposal had been made many, many times in the past.
Right.
And I mean, if you look at me, you can tell I'm not the obvious candidate to propose a corporate VCs to TDK. I'm not Japanese. I don't speak Japanese. I'm not based in Tokyo. And they just acquired my company a year earlier. So I was not even a long-time TDK employee. But it's because I came with a very clear reason on the why. And apparently all the proposals that had been made before was much more along the lines of, other Japanese companies have CVCs, we should do one. TDK is an original thinking company. It's not because others are doing it, they're going to do it. And so when I came with a why, which was very simple, I had this one slide with a surfer that was here, and you had a massive wave coming through. And I said, this guy was waving and happy, that's your business group. And he's focused for the next 12 months on delivering on his product and his roadmap. And then you have new markets and new technologies. And these two, we have R&D teams and we have the M&A teams that are looking for that. They're looking at new market with existing technologies or new technology in existing market. No one is looking at new market and new technologies combined. That's a big gap, and that's where the wave of disruption is most massive. And I just made the point. Do we want to embrace these disruptions before they happen? Or do we just wait? And the surfer is going to be really in pain if he doesn't see that big wave coming. And when I described it this way with that one slide, the CEO of TDK, my boss, Ishiguro-san, basically said, that's exactly what I want. And so from that point, from that why, so I didn't talk about the how much or the team or the what or what we would invest. None of that. It was about the why. Once we had the why, it took 4 months to get every details fleshed out. And that was in December 2018. In January 2019, that's when I went to the GCV in Montreal. Yeah. That's where I had the chance to meet so many people and ask so many questions. And knowing that it was going to happen, I was extremely careful to ask all the right open questions to everyone to flesh out the details in the following 3 months. So I want to give a big thank you to the GCV and to everyone who helped me in Montreal that time. That was really helpful.
Yeah, it was. I remember that meeting. It was so fascinating to see how you approached it in the questions. And actually, it's something that you've continued. It wasn't just the starting point, ask questions then and then feel you know the answer and heads down and continue. Because you do the amazing CVC Insider podcast series, interviews with people in collaboration with 500 startups. And we're honored to sort of publish some of the insights out of that, some of the transcripts, because you talk to the who's who of the corporate venture industry. And I suppose you use a great phrase, and we publish these golden nuggets, I think you call them, when you talk to a CVC and you use them to sell. What are the golden nuggets that kind of inspired you to begin with and kind of still inspire you take out of these amazing podcasts that you do? And I suppose what would be the opposite of a golden nugget? What would be the pyrite? What would be the things that you felt people wanted to give you as good advice, but actually when you tested it, it wasn't quite good enough. It wasn't quite going to help you. So how do you think about the golden nuggets, and what did you have to leave behind when you were setting up?
So first, thank you for mentioning the Corporate Venturing Insider series. And I want to thank everyone who has participated to it. At the end, I'm the newbie. I'm the one who need to learn from the best. And I'm so happy to be able to invite these people who have learned so much about corporate venturing and that can bring so much. So I think we are getting at number 33. So so many people have shared their time to share their insights and what they've learned along the way. And every single interview, I learned something new. So it's still a journey. What I also learned from these interviews is that there is not a single journey into corporate venturing. Everyone has a different journey. So that's actually quite liberating for anyone who's thinking about getting into corporate venturing, because there is not one school to follow or one path to follow. It's actually many, many paths leads to that. And if I go back to my journey, my personal journey, I think the fact I have an engineering background, then I moved into product marketing, then product management, then head of worldwide sales, then I moved to ecosystem. All of that you can see in some of the design choices I made for TDK Ventures, and that becomes our DNA, and that build together with the team our core values. And so I would say that you really need to find how you combine the best practices, you avoid all the pitfalls, but you also stay true to your DNA. And when I say your DNA, it's of course the head of the CVC, it's the team, but it's also the corporation that you want to serve. And if you do that well, I think you get your own voice, your own brand, and your own way of contributing to the success of the entrepreneurs you bet on.
Interesting. That's a great way of putting it. And I suppose, that journey, that starting point 3 years ago from the light bulb, hearing corporate venture and capital mentioned in some ways at Stanford, through to then getting it going, getting it through management, and then obviously building an amazing team that you have around you with Ranil and Andrew and your newest recruit, Tina.
Yes, Tina, welcome, Tina.
Amazing. We know Tina very well. And I suppose, how do you think about that process? What advice would you give to these 1,000 or so newbies that are now coming out over the past year? What surprised you, and what would you, if you had to do your time again, what advice would you really give to kind of really keep them on their toes?
So maybe I would share with you, Jim, something I haven't shared with you, which is I am extremely passionate about the science of decision making. And in the past 3 companies, I've actually given class and I taught decision making to many, many teams. So I've probably taught about 1,000 people by now about decision making. And so I've been extremely careful when I've done my recruitment, not just the design of the CVC, but the recruitment, to look for diversity of thought. And what that means is that when I recruit someone new to the team, I'm looking for people who are going to think differently from each other, but also from me. I'm not looking for Nicolas Sauvage this. I'm really looking for people who are going to come with a different way of thinking. And that means that I also need to enable them to go all the way with their thoughts, which hopefully sometimes will be contrarian views that will prove correct in the future. And so one of the design choice I made, which is along the side of this diversity of thought, is even though I'm the president of TDK Ventures, I do not have a veto right on the investment director making an investment proposal. So once they are well researched, they are convinced, and they're passionate about an investment, and they have really researched to make sure this is a king of the hill in the space, they can go and make the investment proposal, even if I don't believe in it.
Interesting. That's a great thing. Do you follow this sort of good judgment project, on terms of how you kind of look at what your expectations are, and then how sort of different data points can adjust, and then sort of what the end conclusions will be? Because that seems to be a sort of an important part as well. So I'm interested if you kind of look at the theses that you developed maybe 3 years ago, or your team has developed, and then sort of roadmap against it and say what's changed, or how does that change? Is that part of your approach as well?
So here I'm going to relate to the audience an amazing advice that Megan Sharp gave at the Monterey event in January 2019. Which,
just for record, Megan, the head of BP Ventures. Yeah, yes.
Exactly, the head of BP Ventures. And she gave that advice, which is document everything, track everything from day one. If you wait, it's going to be really hard to go back in time. So everything we do, we document and we track, and every so often we go back in time and look at what we did. And so, for example, we have a process with the investing team, which is really, really good. And I recommend it to everyone, which is we have a regular meeting to look at how we are going to deploy our reserve for our Fund 1 portfolio companies. And what that means is we look back in time in terms of how we thought they would do and what we think they are going to do now. Because when you think about reserves and the follow-on investment, it's no longer about the strategic values anymore. It's actually about the financial decisions about how you should deploy this capital the right way. And that means you have to be very critical about your past investments and decide which ones now you believe should get even super pro rata and the ones we just do pro rata, or maybe sometimes we wouldn't do a follow. And that's, I think, a really interesting process because it forces us to look at everyone's investment and challenge each other about, so actually that didn't turn out to be the traction they were going to get, or wow, they went much faster than we expected. This is really, really good. And I think what I'm hoping with this process as well is we become better investors as well. We start to learn from what we've done in the past, where we were too optimistic, when we were too conservative, and then we can adjust and calibrate.
I think that's a great approach. And then I suppose one of the things when you're thinking about that sort of calibration and approach is almost the sustainability of something, because ultimately, you've already had a number of IPOs and exits in record time, which is very impressive. But on the whole, to get to a proper exit can take 9, 10 or 11 years, particularly in some of the harder tech challenges that TDK is known for. And so I suppose, how do you think about the sort of overlaying a sort of, is this strategic? Is this financially going to be successful? Those two metrics that people often look at. It's not an either or, it's not a continuum, but you have to look at both at the same time in many ways. Yeah. But how do you think then about the sort of the broader ESG sustainability? Obviously, we're talking during COP26. We're excited to see the sort of news coming out of the UK, out of Glasgow, about some of this change and opportunities. But you were already thinking about this a while ago. Do you look at this now? How does it impact you?
So my boss, Ishiguro-san, the CEO of TDK, is basically giving me one guidance. and this is really beautiful in a way. He says, invest where we can contribute to society and make sure you delight the entrepreneurs. You make them more successful. And from that, we can really do a lot. Wow. So I think this is really part of our DNA. And when I say part of the DNA, it's not just TDK Ventures, it's all of TDK, where we want to contribute to society and we really want to do good. And so we have a slide when we introduce ourselves where we show 3 circles that overlap. And they are the 3 investment criteria that we use. Financial return. So we look at startups that we believe can return the fund, like a financial VC. The second one is strategic value. But in a way, we are looking at strategic value from the point of view of what can we leverage from TDK Corporation to bring more value to the portfolio company we are going to invest in. Most times when we talk about strategic value, we are more thinking the way of from the startup to the mothership. And here we take the bet that if we can bring value from the corporations to the portfolio companies, we are going to learn a lot from that process. And the third circle, the third investment criteria is sustainability. And this one is really actually interesting because it means there's the obvious. We're not going to invest in military applications. But sometimes we are going to see a company, maybe a flow sensor that looks really interesting. But that startup wants to use it for e-cigarette. That's not for us. So we use these 3 investment criteria and we only invest when there is an overlap of the 3. And here we have to make a leap of faith that we're going to see so many startups with so many good projects that the overlap will not be 0 startup. It will be some. And so far, we've seen and reviewed more than 2,500 startups, wow. And we have invested in 18. So in practice, if I simplify, we say yes once, and we say no 100 times. So this is really where you need to stick to your investment criteria. And that reminds me, a comment you made saying we move fast and we have invested in 18 companies already. We have no KPIs about number of investment. Each investment needs to come with very strong conviction on financial return, strategic value, and also sustainability. And if we have these three, we go for it. And we really go all in because we want these entrepreneurs to be very, very successful.
Can you give an example about that? Perhaps, looking at the wall behind you, I see a sort of, robotic thing. Obviously, there's, the sort of, different deep technologies. There's drones, there's chips. Perhaps there's one that really sort of stands out to you even now about the perfect type of example.
Okay, I think you're asking me which kid I prefer.
No, that just met the thesis so perfectly. That was almost your sort of, idealized one. All kids are beautiful. We know that, but there was one that some kids just.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. So I'll just pick battery resources, which is this one, which is recycling used batteries and recycling not just into pure materials that can be reused, but actually straight to cathode materials. And what that means is financial returns will be higher because the unit economics are so much better than all the other battery recycling solutions we've seen. Two, actually, I should start with the sustainability. This is amazing because there is no way with the exponential demand of batteries for EVs and other solutions, we can have enough materials to create batteries. Whether it's in 10 years or 20 years, there is a point where it's not going to be good. And already today, mining these materials create a lot of pollution. We are harming the planet every time. So we should really think about how we can recycle these batteries. And three, this strategic value, we really need to understand at TDK how we should be responsible about batteries. Nearly half of the revenue of TDK Corporation comes from battery solutions. We really need to understand this really, really well. And if we can think about it from end to end, from the creation of the battery to the recycling and the reuse, or even the used batteries, how they are going to be used, that really matters a lot for a corporation that really want to contribute to society. So battery resources is an interesting one because you can see how they are having all these three investment criteria really, really strong. And of course, the feedstock in this space is just enormous. I mean, of course, you know about the recalls, which is always a bad thing for the industry. But these recalls mean that these batteries need to be recycled. So the supply of these components is just exponential. And we need to do something about it. So this is one we feel extremely good about because they are really on the path of doing good and doing well.
Interesting. What a great example. It's a fascinating one. And I think recently it's just raised to the latest round. So you've obviously timed that early deal perfectly. Is that one that you did a super pro rata for on that basis?
Yes, I think we could say that. I think this is one where we feel extremely strongly about, and we actually believe it can return the fund.
Wow, that's a great position to be. Now, very briefly, this is an open-ended question, Nicolas, but it's a brief one. We've only got sort of final 90 seconds or so. What is your hope for the future? It could be about TDK Ventures, it could be personally, but COP26 is inspiring people to look ahead. So what is your hope personally?
Well, with the audience that is listening, I'm hoping that everyone is thinking about how we can be kinder and more respectful to the planet. I think this is something where our money that we invest and all the superpowers that our corporations can give us as a corporate VC can make a huge difference. If we bet on the right entrepreneurs with the right projects to do well for the planet and therefore for the society, we can really do a lot of good. And I like to think about it as impact scaler. The entrepreneurs we invest in are impact scalers. Their mission is to scale the impact, the good impact they want to do to society and the planet. Us as corporate VCs, we put the money into these impact scalers. And if we do it well, we can really help them with money plus what we call TDK goodness, which is what others are calling different ways. And therefore, we are kind of the impact scaler square. We are the impact scaler behind all these impact scalers. And that's why I think learning from the GCV about all the best practices and the network and all the amazing people that have shared on the CVC Insider series and that attend these events. If you're new in CVC, do attend these meetings, ask open questions, learn from these people who have done it for 10, 20 years.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. It's a great way to finish. And thank you, Nicolas, for your kindness in joining us today.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Best wishes.